Hi everyone, welcome to my Friday video blog post. This is to accompany my regular text blog post. I'm just going to start posting a video accompaniment as well. So this week I'm going to be having a little bit of a chat about creative nonfiction, what it is and how to write it. So creative nonfiction is a way to tell a factual story in a fictional narrative. So the term creative nonfiction, I actually learnt this term very recently. I was introduced to this term by my own mentor, Brisbane author Lee Scott. Before I learnt of this term, I had been referring to my creative nonfiction stories as biographical novels. But then I learnt the term creative nonfiction, which I use now. So creative nonfiction is a term to describe a story which is based on truth but is being written in a fictional narrative. So it's being written as a novel or a fictional short story or whatever. It's basically like a fictional voice. So the words creative and non-fiction describe the style. These are stories about real people and events, but unlike a biography or an autobiography, they are written to read like fictional stories. It's a way of storytelling that I believe creates a safe platform for anybody to tell their story and also retain their privacy if that's something that they want to do. As a writer, if you are writing not your own story, if you're writing somebody else's story, you have the ability to be more creative. Even if you are writing your own story, you have the ability to be more creative, free of the restrictions of facts, writing with facts. So you've got the ability to be a little bit more creative with the way that you write. So creative nonfiction is not restricted to novels. The genre is also known as literary fiction, and it can encompass travel writing, nature writing, sports writing, science writing, biographies, autobiographies, memoirs, interviews, and essays. This is my book, The Wilted Rose. It was my first book, and it is a creative non-fiction book. It's the first manuscript that I ever wrote, and my creative non-fiction novel is based on a Brisbane family who are dealing with the effects of mental illness during the 1960s and 70s. I was asked to write the book and given a detailed outline of the story, which I then proceeded to turn into, to rewrite in a fictional narrative. So, a couple of tips on writing creative nonfiction. You need to get your facts straight, even though it is a fictionalised recount or fictionalised story. You do still need to get your facts straight because it usually is based around a true story. Even though you're writing a story that's stylized in fiction, the bottom line is that the story is still based on fact. While you can be more creative with the narrative, you are still responsible for getting the facts straight. So, for example, the movie Titanic, it was a fictionalized account of the event with fictionalized characters, but it was based around a real event, so there had to be particular factors that had to be acknowledged and portrayed correctly, etc., etc. So you might create your own characters, but you still need to get dates correct, statistics correct, etc. You could come up against scrutiny if you do not follow through with getting these facts straight. You could get a little bit ridiculed by publishers, by readers, critiquers, etc., etc. So you can use a disclaimer as well in your creative nonfiction story. So think of the opening of Law and Order, which has a disclaimer that reads, "The following story is fictional and does not depict any actual person or event." So although we can tell by watching a Law and Order episode, I don't know about you, but definitely me, when I've watched some before, I can definitely tell where they've gotten their inspiration from, what events or stories they've gotten their inspiration to create their episode. But they have changed names, they've obviously changed locations, they've changed various identifying aspects about the story to retain that privacy. So minor details have been changed here and there. So consider the repercussions as well. In my experience of writing The Wilted Rose, I was lucky enough I didn't come up against too much scrutiny. I actually received it was received relatively well by the family and friends of the subject matter of the main character. Some minor complaints were made about the way that I portrayed the Brethren Church, saying that I was too harsh about the Brethren Church in my book. However, the events were a personal recount of the main character in the story, on their personal experiences, for which I had full permission to use. So I had the full permission of that person to use their experiences. Everybody has a right to tell their story, even if somebody else doesn't necessarily agree with that particular angle. That person still has the right to tell their story, even if somebody else doesn't agree that things unfolded in that particular way. However, sometimes due to even considering our best efforts to change the details are not enough. I have heard personal stories from other authors that even though they have gone to the ends of the earth to try and cover up identifying facts, and even if the person that has complained to them was only a very minor mention or a very minor character in their story, they've still come up against some complaint if they haven't properly asked permission or properly disclosed what they were going to be writing about in their story. So it is very important that you've got the right permissions from people. And if you are writing the story for somebody else, as I did with The Wilted Rose, do make sure that you're maintaining effective communication with that person that you're writing the story for, so that you're making sure that you've got all your facts straight and that other person is clear about what you're going to be putting in the book as well. So you're both on the same page, you both know what's going to be involved. So be objective as well. When I'm writing creative nonfiction, I like to think that I'm just laying out a story. I'm laying out the facts on the table, telling a story from someone's point of view. If someone else comes along and challenges that idea that I have conveyed in the story, then that's their own opinion. Allow the reader to take from the story what they will and form their own opinion. It's important to not get too wrapped up about what somebody else is going to think about the story, but it's also important to not involve your own bias in the story too much as well. This is a tip in all over general fiction, I think. You as the author don't want to be putting your own opinions and your own biased into your story. You want, especially if it's a straight out fiction story, you want your characters to have that coming through. And with creative nonfiction, you want to try and avoid that bias. You're just putting these facts down on the table, not your own voice or angle. So pay attention to the language that you're using as well with creative nonfiction. With this particular genre, even though you are writing a factual story, like I said, you do have some liberties to be able to expand on your dialogue and be a bit more creative in the narrative that you're using. So don't forget to do that. You don't want it to read exactly like a non-fictional, very factual based story. You want to come across for what it is and make it read as a fictional story. So you can be a bit more creative with the language that you use and the storytelling techniques. Also be selective with the stories that you do choose to use for your creative nonfiction. Like I said before, I feel very strongly about taking people's stories from the community and sharing them with the public, especially if they come from somebody who is not necessarily a writer. If I can enable them to be able to tell their story, then I'm happy to do so. But you do want to be selective about the stories that you tell. They do have to be interesting. If you're wanting to get them published, they are going to have to be appealing to the reader. So, for example, if you're just writing a story about somebody's first day of college or first year of college, that's probably not going to be interesting enough or unique enough to maintain a reader's interest. So do be conscious of that when you're selecting your material. Maybe you can think of a different angle of this very mundane type of story. If it's a pretty ordinary, everyday kind of story, try and brainstorm some different angles maybe that you can use to create a niche, original point of interest for the reader. So a different angle that nobody has used before, or something that's interesting. So yes, being selective with the stories. With my own experience with The Wilted Rose, I had quite a few people come back to me that had experience. One of the main characters in The Wilted Rose was a nurse working in Brisbane, in the 1950s. So we've had other female professionals that were working in the 1950s, which was interesting to hear how they related to being a professional during that time in history. And also, especially a bigger one on top of that was people relating to the themes of mental health in The Wilted Rose as well, and family members coping with one of their other family members with their mental health concerns. That was one of the biggest things that people have related to me about. So it's finding those key points that the reader can relate to as well. So to finish up, creative nonfiction is perhaps the fiction world's answer to reality entertainment. So you've got reality TV. Creative nonfiction is probably slots into that in the literary world as well. Like I said, what I love about the genre is the ability for lots of people to be able to share their stories, more people being able to share their stories with the world. In this more safer, private platform where we can change names and we can change specific details so it can still remain private for them. So I certainly do hope that we do start to read some more stories like this out there, and more people starting to share their stories, because so many people have these fascinating stories and they just stay hidden in the community and not getting told because maybe the person just isn't a writer themselves or something like that. So as a writer, I take on that duty to do that for other people. But you yourself, you can tell your own story or another story as well. So it's very exciting. I'm certainly going to be inputting into more creative nonfiction. I've got a creative nonfiction series of books that I'm actually announcing on my blog next Friday, which is really exciting. So I hope that you'll join me for that. I'm going to be announcing my new series of creative nonfiction books by releasing the cover for the first book, the first installation of that particular story. So that's next Friday. I hope that you can join me. Friday at 3 p.m. I'm going to be announcing my new creative non-fiction series of books and releasing the cover for the first book. So I will see you next Friday. Do ask me any questions. If you have any questions about creative non-fiction, do get in touch with me via my blog or Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. Do get in touch and I'll be happy to have a conversation with you and answer any questions that you have. Okay, see you next Friday.